everyone, Deanna here, and thanks so much for being here. Today's video is going to be a book review, and the book I'm reviewing is going to be Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry. I'm gonna go ahead and read out my summary for this memoir. In this very brutally honest memoir, Matthew Perry shares the joys and downright struggles of his rise to fame as Chandler Bing in Friends. Beyond that, though, he takes readers on a journey through his real lows during his decades-long addiction to drugs and alcohol, and how even when all your dreams come true, you can still be completely miserable. He shares this in hopes that his journey and story can ultimately help someone else who may be struggling. So I listened to this one through audiobook. It is one of my favorite formats when it is a celebrity's memoir, which would be who Matthew Perry is. He is a pretty infamous celebrity, known very much for his portrayal as Chandler Bing on the very successful show Friends that ran from about 1994 to 2004. He definitely was one of that spectacular cast of the individuals who made up the cast for Friends. He is someone that is very widespread known, and he was, in my opinion, one of the funniest characters on the show. He was always one of my favorites. I had a little bit of a crush on him growing up. I thought he was hilarious with his sarcasm and wit as the character Chandler Bing. That is ultimately what the character Chandler is known for, is his sarcasm and wit, and it seems the actor Matthew Perry is not far from that. He also starred in quite a few movies as well, and that tends to be his character. It tends to be the very witty, funny type of character that is sometimes a bit of the goofball and the silly one that breaks the tension by making a offhand joke sometimes. So that was very much Matthew Perry, and in this memoir he kind of takes us behind the scenes about who he is and what he kind of went through behind the scenes. If you're looking at this as a behind the scenes of just Friends or like a Friends tell-all or anything, that is not what it really is. Of course, he does talk about his time on Friends a bit, because it is the one that launched him into stardom and made all of those individuals so incredibly famous and very, very rich. But that is not just what this book is focused on. If anything, this book is mainly focused on his addiction struggles and the struggles that he had with drugs and alcohol. So just very much keep that in mind if you are looking for a Friends tell-all. That's not really going to be what this is. This is going to be Matt's portrayal of what happened. And some of it was pretty surprising to hear, and there were moments where I personally find that in the beginning of the memoir, while listening to it in his own voice, which is always why I love getting audiobooks, because I love hearing them in the actor's own voice, at first he sounds kind of almost bitter and disinterested, and like he's got a lot that he needs to come to terms with and deal with. So he has a lot of angry tones throughout the beginning of the book, I feel like, and there's some things that he kind of talks about that you're just like, ooh, at least I was like, ooh, that's a little harsh. But I do feel as the book continues, I do feel like the bitterness goes away a bit. I do feel like he still has maybe a little bit of some anger to his tone a bit, but I feel like throughout the book he talks about that and how he struggled with that and trying to find genuine happiness and trying to find gratitude for his life, because he talks about how he had everything. He had the whole world practically. He was the #1 TV show in America. He was at one point the #1 movie as well, with the whole 9 yards with Bruce Willis. He talks about that a bit too, and yet he still felt like something was missing. So I think this is going to be a book that resonates with people that do struggle with that struggle with that ability to feel that happiness that others supposedly feel, and that you feel like you should be feeling but you don't, so then you feel like there's something wrong with you. He explores that a lot in this memoir, and he talks about very candidly his issues with drugs and what that did to him, and some of the repercussions that brought, of not only the mental anguish that it brought upon him, and sometimes the struggles with acting in general, but also the health implications of what it did to his health, and some of the very scary things that he faced in that regard. So he was very, very transparent in that, and I do appreciate that very much, that he was transparent in that way. I also will note, if you've heard anything about this memoir, you may have seen some things circulating about how he takes a dig at Keanu Reeves, or there was also some things about like how he talks about some other people, and yeah, there is a thing or two about that. I didn't focus too much on that, because I do feel like that is very much Matthew Perry's humor, and that's kind of what I came to know him by watching Friends. He was very much one that is going to be a very dry type of humor, and sometimes make the silly joke that not everyone's gonna make, or maybe he sometimes is finding a way to find humor that might be off-putting to some. So there is that to consider. And there were moments when I was rolling my eyes listening, because yes, I don't feel like he speaks very highly of women. I do feel like there's a bit of some just misogyny almost, or just looking at women as almost just objects of sex and desire, and so that did come across a bit in the memoir. So that sometimes was just not as fun to listen to when he was going on about that. But then there was the other side of me that was like, well, at least he's being honest. As much as I want him to realize that perhaps there's more to women than just being for his pleasure, I did appreciate that at least he wasn't shying from that's what he was feeling at the time, and that's how he was handling his own shortcomings in a lot of ways. And I think he did explore that a bit, and that wasn't the best way to be, and that it did make his life even more empty when it was just feeling very meaningless in a lot of ways. So, but then he also did talk about that there were some women that he really loved, and he kind of was regretful on how things went, because he always felt inadequate, so it always made him push away those that he loved. So he does explore that as well. The only other complaint I have about this novel and the way it was written was when I was listening to it, sometimes it did jump around a bit of the timeline. So sometimes it was hard to think, okay, are we back when he was on Friends? Are we now when he's in his 50s? What is going on? Where are we in this timeline? So there was just a little bit of that. It wasn't too bad most of the time, but there were a couple times when I was like, wait a minute, did we just jump back to his past, or are we back to the present? What's kind of going on? So that is just something to be mindful of. But with this novel, memoir, I did do a journal entry in my reading journal. I used some craft paper for some of the edges. I used some stickers that I had from some of my sticker packs. Like some of these are just from the dollar store, and then some of them are from my happy planners that I have. He does talk a bit about, again, gratitude and just never feeling like he was enough, and that's why he kept pushing and kept feeling he had to be something beyond who he really was, and he never felt like he was comfortable enough to show who he really was, and if he did, then people were just going to run in the other direction. So I just wanted to put that reminder that we are all enough of who we are, and that can be a struggle all in itself to accept that, and he does explore that very much. I also have some of these stickers too from a Friends pack that I had, because I am a big fan of Friends, so my opinion's going to be a bit biased. Just, you know, if you haven't already gathered that, I will have a bit of bias because I have such a love of Friends and the love of the character Chandler. I'm trying to put that aside a bit and see them as separate, because even though he very much was Chandler in so many ways, he was also his own person too, and so trying to separate that, because he even talks about that too in the book, about trying to separate himself from the character of Chandler that he played for 10 years. So that was interesting as well. Overall, the reason I gave this 5 stars was because, one, whenever it is someone's memoir, I am just always in awe that they were able to share their story, especially when they get as transparent and vulnerable as Matthew does in this story, in this book. It's really hard to get to that point, and not everyone can get to that point, and in some ways that's okay, but those that can put themselves out there for public scrutiny and for public to point a finger at them and pick apart everything they say about their own lives, I think that's a big thing to put out there. So I definitely appreciated that he could write this all down, because this is kind of a tell-all in its own way, in his own words. So for that, I do also appreciate that he took the narrative, because there was so many speculations of what was going on with him, and so many things about, well, how bad is he, and who is he, and what's kind of going on, that this has happened to him, that he's just a privileged rich guy that kind of let drugs and alcohol take over. And I think, sure, there's some of that, definitely, but it's so much more deeper than just that, as any type of addiction is. It's so much more bigger than even the person sometimes, and that's what can be so overwhelming about it and make it feel like it's so insurmountable. So I just want to credit him for that strength and that bravery of coming forward, because there are people that very much look down their nose at addicts and those that are alcoholics and just think, well, just stop drinking or just stop doing drugs. Like, what's wrong with you? And I think the battles that people face are so much more. And I think that's too what I really appreciated about his memoir, was he talks about that. He kind of takes on a bit of talking about how messed up some of the recovery is for people who are addicts, and how maybe some of these treatment centers aren't really equipped to handle people who are struggling so much, and that maybe there needs to be different methods, and maybe the whole industry of treatment and recovery centers and these places that, especially when you're talking like the rehabs that are the big facilities that people literally get isolated to go to, they're completely taken away from their lives and their family and their friends, and they're placed in these rehab centers, sometimes of course for their health and their safety, and their family is feeling at their limit, and what else can they do? But then sometimes what happens is, yeah, sure, maybe they dry out and they leave in such a vulnerable state, though, because then they're pushed back into their lives where nothing really has changed in some ways. Unless some people are able to make different changes in different ways, they're going to go right back to the same kind of patterns and habits that happen because their actual life was so sheltered for a bit while they were in that facility that when they get pushed back out into their regular lives again, how do they cope and how do they deal when things go wrong again? So I think there's definitely some valid criticism in what he says about that process and how can we make it better to help all those people that we're losing, especially since there is such an epidemic when it comes to overdoses and things like that, and we've lost so many people, whether it's in the public eye and they're the rich and famous, or it's your friend or your family member or someone that you care about, your coworker who is lost to such a horrible disease. So that was something that I got emotional a bit sometimes just thinking about and listening to, and I am grateful that he put this out to maybe hopefully spark a conversation about that and take a look at what's kind of happening and how can we do better to help save so many lives that are being lost for such unnecessary reasons. So I did very much appreciate that. I do think this book, though, is very polarizing in a lot of ways. You are either going to really love it because maybe you're a big Matthew Perry fan or a big Friends fan, or you're just really appreciative of him talking about his journey and you relate to it, or you're really going to hate it because you're going to look at this man as an older, I mean, he's in his 50s now, white man who is very privileged in a lot of ways, and he has a very privileged life, and maybe you're going to think that he's not saying some things that you really agree with. So I do feel like it could be very, very polarizing in that way. But I take all of that and I recognize all of the faults that he has and all of the things that could be better. But then I also look at how much he is a man that is trying to do his best to navigate life, and maybe he didn't make all the best choices, and maybe sometimes his views are a little skewed, but at the end of the day, sometimes that's what I feel like we're all trying to struggle with, is we're all just trying to struggle to get through life and trying to find some meaning in what life is and some type of purpose. And he talks about that, about trying to find his purpose and trying to be someone that he can be proud to be. And I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling of trying to find gratitude when sometimes it can feel very overwhelming and we feel like we can't find it. So I really appreciate that of what he said. Overall, it was a very interesting look into the life of Matthew Perry, some of the wildness that he went through, and sometimes we wish and hope for something and it turns out to be not quite what we want, and sometimes not what we needed. So, and sometimes you don't know that until, like he says, all of your dreams come true, and then sometimes you realize they're the wrong dreams. So I think that's a big telling of sometimes it doesn't matter how wonderful someone's life seems, we don't really know what it's like behind the scenes. And he very much takes us on that behind the scenes look into how things weren't quite as picture perfect as maybe they appeared to be. I'm just glad that he is still here, that he is still alive, and that I'm hopeful he's in a better headspace and he is doing better on his recovery, because I feel like he has a lot to recover over, not just his addictions but even the health impacts that it created as well that he explores. And I just hope that he continues to maintain his sobriety and finds the love and joy and happiness that he really yearns for himself and for others as well. So those were my thoughts on Matthew Perry's Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you've read this memoir or what you thought of it. Do you enjoy memoirs from celebrities? Would you rather read other types of memoirs, or do you just not enjoy memoirs at all? Go ahead and let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And for anyone who is struggling, you are enough. And I hope you continue to find that joy inside yourself and realize how valid you are and how worthy you are for love and the peace that you so want to find. So thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Thank you so much for being here. Take care of yourselves, and you will see me next time.